A first-class ticket and a priority pass weren't enough. When Dr. Nora Reed, a brilliant black woman, stepped into the priority line at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, she expected a smooth journey to her multi-million-dollar contract signing. Instead, she was met with suspicion and contempt from an airline employee and a fellow passenger publicly humiliated and pulled aside like a criminal. But the gate agent and the sneering passenger made a fatal mistake. They had no idea they weren't just disrespecting a passenger. They were targeting the architect of their airline's very survival. And the consequences would be catastrophic. The air in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with a familiar, organized chaos. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the low murmur of 1,000 intersecting journeys. For Dr. Nora Reed, it was just background noise. She navigated the throng in Concourse T with the practiced ease of a seasoned traveler, her sensible yet stylish heels clicking a steady rhythm on the polished terrazzo floor. Nora was the founder and CEO of Ethelred Innovations, a boutique software engineering firm that had become the silent powerhouse behind some of the world's most successful tech platforms. At 34, she possessed a mind that saw the world in elegant lines of code and complex data structures. Her demeanor was one of quiet confidence, her gaze sharp and analytical. Today she was dressed in a charcoal grey tailored blazer over a simple silk shell, a stark contrast to the casual travel wear around her. It was her armor, a visual representation of the precision and seriousness with which she approached her life and her work. In her hand was a boarding pass for Aerovista Airlines, Flight 1882 to Seattle. First class. The ticket had been booked by the client she was flying to meet Aerovista Airlines itself. It was the culmination of a grueling 18-month project codenamed Phoenix. Nora and her team at Ethelred had designed and built Aerovista's revolutionary new mobile application from the ground up. It was more than just a booking app. It was a comprehensive logistical marvel that handled everything from ticketing and baggage tracking to crew scheduling and predictive maintenance alerts. The Phoenix project was Aerovista's high-stakes gamble to claw its way back from the brink of bankruptcy and dominate the tech-forward travel market. Tomorrow morning, she was scheduled to meet with the entire Aerovista executive board, including its notoriously demanding CEO Robert Thornton, to finalize the rollout of Phase 2 and sign a new eye-wateringly lucrative 8-figure contract for ongoing development and support. This flight wasn't just a trip, it was a victory lap. She arrived at Gate T8, where the pre-boarding process was about to commence. The digital screen above the gate flashed, Aerovista 1882, Seattle on time. Below it, the priority lanes were clearly marked a plush red carpet for first class and Aerovista's Diamond Medallion members, and a blue one for other priority groups. Nora joined the short queue on the red carpet, placing her sleek leather briefcase at her feet. In front of her was a family with 2 young, excited children, and behind her, a man in a rumpled suit typing furiously on his phone. The atmosphere was one of weary anticipation. The gate agent, a woman in her late 40s with a severe haircut and a name tag that read Brenda, surveyed the line with a look of profound boredom. Her eyes, magnified by thick-lensed glasses, swept over the passengers, making small, instantaneous judgments. When her gaze landed on Nora, it lingered for a fraction of a second too long. It was a look Nora knew well. It wasn't overt hostility, not yet. It was a flicker of cognitive dissonance, a micro-expression that questioned her presence in that specific space. Nora ignored it. She had faced this look in university lecture halls, where she was the only black woman in corporate boardrooms, dominated by grey-haired men, and in high-end restaurants, where the host assumed she was waiting for her employer. It was tiresome, a constant low-grade static of prejudice she had learned to tune out. Her success was the only rebuttal that mattered. "We will now begin our pre-boarding process," Brenda announced into the microphone, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. "We invite our passengers with disabilities and those needing extra time to board." A few moments later she continued, "We now invite our active duty military personnel to board. Thank you for your service." Finally, it was their turn. "Now boarding all first-class passengers and our Diamond Medallion members. Please have your boarding pass and ID ready." The family in front of Nora was processed with a perfunctory smile. As Nora stepped forward, she pulled out her phone, the screen already displaying the QR code of her first-class boarding pass, generated by the very app she had built. She held it out for Brenda to scan her passport, ready in her other hand. The scanner beeped affirmatively. But Brenda didn't wave her through. Instead, she held up a hand, her thin lips pressed into a firm line. "I'm going to need to see that again," Brenda said, her tone shifting from bored to accusatory. Nora held the phone out again, her brow furrowing slightly. "Is there a problem?" Brenda squinted at the screen. "This is the first-class line, ma'am." The ma'am was laced with condescension. It was a simple statement of fact, yet in that context, it felt like an accusation. Nora's internal composure, usually as solid as bedrock, felt a tremor of irritation. "Yes, I know," Nora replied, her voice calm and even. "As my boarding pass indicates, I am in seat 2A, first class." Brenda's eyes flickered from the phone screen to Nora's face, then back again. The line behind Nora was beginning to grow. The man in the rumpled suit sighed audibly. Nora felt a familiar heat creep up her neck, the hot flush of being singled out, of being made a spectacle. There are a lot of fraudulent passes and upgrades being sold online. Brenda stated not to Nora, but to the air as if delivering a public service announcement. "We have to be extra careful." Nora's patience began to fray. "Are you suggesting my pass is fraudulent?" Before Brenda could answer, a new voice, sharp and entitled, cut in from the blue priority lane. "What's the hold-up? Some of us have planes to catch." Nora glanced over to see a woman in her 50s, dressed head to toe in designer athleisure, wear her face a mask of impatience. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair didn't move as she glared pointedly at Nora. Brenda seemed to draw strength from this new ally. She looked back at Nora, her authority now bolstered. "I'm just doing my job. I need to verify your ticket. Please step to the side, ma'am. You're holding up the line." Stepping to the side. The three words were a dismissal, an exile. It wasn't a request. It was a command that relegated her from esteemed first-class passenger to public nuisance. And as she was forced to move away from the red carpet, the weight of expectation she carried of a triumphant meeting, a signed contract, a celebration of her hard work was suddenly replaced by the crushing weight of humiliation. The directive to step to the side hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment, Nora was frozen, not by indecision, but by a cold, familiar fury. It was the kind of fury that didn't roar, but burned a low, intense heat deep within her. To comply felt like accepting the accusation. To refuse felt like inviting a scene she had neither the time nor the desire for. "There's no need for me to step aside," Nora said, her voice dropping to a lower, more deliberate register. She did not raise it. She infused it with an unshakable certainty that had closed multi-million-dollar deals. "You can verify my ticket right here. Scan the code again. Check my passport. My name is Dr. Nora Reed. The ticket was purchased by your own corporate office." The mention of the corporate office should have been a red flag for Brenda, a signal to de-escalate. Instead, It seemed to embolden her, as if she'd caught Nora in a lie. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again." Brenda snapped her face, flushed with irritation. "The line is for legitimate first-class passengers. Please, step aside." The woman in the athleisure suit, whose name Nora would later learn, was Rebecca Lawson, now strode purposefully from the blue lane, positioning herself directly behind where Nora had been standing. "Honestly, the nerve of some people," Rebecca announced loudly to the man in the rumpled suit. "They think they can just waltz into the priority line. I pay a fortune for my diamond medallion status to avoid this sort of thing. This sort of thing." The phrase was a dagger. It wasn't about a ticket anymore. It was about Nora herself, her presence, her skin. Nora's gaze locked onto Rebecca's, and she saw in the woman's eyes a lifetime of unearned privilege, a worldview in which Nora simply did not compute as a peer. Nora turned her full attention back to Brenda, her voice now sharp as obsidian. "I am a legitimate first-class passenger. You are making a baseless accusation in front of a crowd of people. I suggest you do your job, scan my pass, and let me board the plane I'm scheduled to be on." The standoff had now drawn more attention. People in the general boarding area were starting to watch their faces, a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. The family that had boarded ahead of her glanced back from the jet bridge entrance with worried expressions. Brenda, cornered and clearly out of her depth, made a fatal decision. She chose to double down rather than retreat. "All right, that's it." She picked up the phone at her podium. "I'm calling security." "Security?" Nora's voice was incredulous. "You're calling security because you are incapable of verifying a valid ticket." "I'm calling security because you're causing a disturbance and refusing to follow the instructions of an airline official." Brenda retorted, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and self-righteousness. Rebecca Lawson smirked a small, triumphant curl of her lip. "Good. It's about time someone dealt with her." A few minutes later, 2 airport security officers arrived. They were not TSA agents, but private security contracted by the airport. One was a tall, weary-looking man named Frank, who looked like he'd seen it all and was tired of most of it. The other was younger, more eager, his hand resting near his sidearm, as if he expected trouble. Frank approached the gate. "What's the situation here, Brenda? This woman," Brenda said, pointing a finger at Nora, "is refusing to leave the priority boarding area. Her ticket seems suspicious, and she's become disruptive." Frank turned his tired eyes to Nora. He saw an impeccably dressed, composed black woman and a flustered gate agent. He had refereed this kind of dispute 100 times. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass and ID?" Frank asked, his tone neutral. Nora, seeing a potential, albeit humiliating path to resolution, handed her passport and phone to the officer. "Of course. My name is Dr. Nora Reed. I'm ticketed in seat 2A on this flight. The gate agent has refused to properly verify it." Frank examined the passport, then the boarding pass on the phone. He looked from the name and photo to Nora's face. Everything matched perfectly. He turned back to Brenda. "The documents look fine, Brenda," he said, a note of exasperation in his voice. "The name matches the passport. Just let her board." For a rational person, this would have been the end. But Brenda was not feeling rational. She felt her authority had been challenged in front of her passengers, and now in front of security. Her pride was on the line. The QR code could be a deep fake, Brenda insisted, her voice rising. "Corporate security sent us a memo about it. You have to check it against the flight manifest. I can't do that. From here, I have to use the main terminal. She needs to come with me." It was a ludicrous, transparent lie. Every gate agent had access to the flight manifest on their computer system. Frank knew it. Nora knew it. But the younger officer, sensing a non-compliant passenger, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the younger officer said, his voice firm. "We'll sort this out away from the gate so these other folks can board." Nora looked at the line of people, staring at Rebecca Lawson's smug expression, at Brenda's triumphant glare. They were not just asking her to step aside anymore. They were escorting her away like a common criminal. The humiliation was absolute. It coated her skin thick and oily. She had a choice. She could argue, and demand a supervisor, which would undoubtedly result in her missing the flight, the single most important flight of her professional year. Or she could submit to this farce, get it sorted out, and still make the plane, swallowing the bitter pill of injustice. With a deep, controlled breath, she made the pragmatic choice. "Fine." She said the word clipped and cold. "Let's go sort this out." She retrieved her briefcase, her movements precise and deliberate, betraying none of the volcanic rage churning in her gut, as Frank and the younger officer flanked her. Walking her away from the gate and back towards the main concourse, she heard Rebecca Lawson say to the person behind her, "Finally, some peace and quiet." And just before she turned the corner, she heard Brenda's voice sickeningly sweet back on the microphone. "We do apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We are now continuing our first-class boarding." They hadn't just delayed her. They had erased her, dismissed her, and then apologized for the inconvenience of her existence. In that moment, Nora Reed made a promise to herself. They would all come to regret this. They had no idea who they had just crossed. The walk away from Gate T8 was a blur of fluorescent lights and unsympathetic faces. Nora was led not to a quiet office or a customer service desk, but to a small, sterile alcove designated for secondary security screenings. It was a glass-walled box of shame, designed to be visible to passers-by. Frank, the older officer, seemed to realize the absurdity of the situation, while his younger partner maintained a rigid, officious posture. "Look, ma'am," Frank began, his voice low. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. We just need to wait for the gate agent to verify things on her end." "The gate agent's name is Brenda," Nora stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "And she is not seeking to verify anything. She is seeking to humiliate me. There is a difference." Frank had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Airline policy can be—" "That wasn't policy," Nora cut in sharply. "That was prejudice. Let's call it what it is." She pulled out her phone, intending to call her executive assistant and have her raise hell with Aerovista's corporate contacts. But before she could, her screen lit up with an incoming call from a number she knew by heart: Ben Carter, her lead systems architect at Ethelred Innovations. Ben never called unless it was a 5-alarm fire. A cold knot of dread formed in Nora's stomach, eclipsing even her anger at the situation. She answered immediately. "Ben, what's wrong?" "Nora, thank God." Ben's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his usual, unflappable calm. "We have a massive problem. A huge problem." "Talk to me," she said, her focus instantly shifting. She was no longer a slighted passenger. She was the CEO of a tech company in crisis. "It's Phoenix," Ben said, his words tumbling out. "There's a critical bug in the back-end server authentication protocol. We didn't catch it in the final stress test. It's subtle, tied to the server's internal clock and passenger load. It seemed fine under simulation, but with the live load from the East Coaster morning rush, it's starting to cascade." Nora's mind raced, processing the information. What are the symptoms? What are the users seeing? API calls are timing out. The app is hanging on the payment confirmation screen for new bookings. Baggage tracking is throwing false positives. But the real kicker, Nora, the real nightmare, is the digital boarding pass generator. It's starting to intermittently fail to sync with the central manifest. Some QR codes are being generated with a corrupted security token. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. A corrupted security token. The very thing Brenda had, in her ignorant paranoia, accused her of. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "What's the failure rate?" Nora demanded, already pacing the small glass box like a caged panther. It was less than 1% an hour ago. It's now approaching 4% and accelerating. The corrupted tokens are creating log jams in the database, which is causing more timeouts, which creates more corruption. It's a feedback loop. The whole system is going to brick itself, Nora. I'm projecting catastrophic failure in 90 minutes, maybe less. 90 minutes. Her flight to Seattle was 90 minutes long. "The patch," she said, her voice urgent. "The patch we developed for the Phase 2 rollout. It contains the fix for the authentication redundancy, doesn't it?" "Yes, it's the only thing that can fix it," Ben confirmed. "But it requires physical access to the primary server hub in Seattle. It's a kernel-level patch. It can't be deployed remotely because of AeroVista's security protocols. Their whole system has to be put into maintenance mode from the master terminal, and only a Level 4 administrator can authorize it. That's you, Nora. You're the only one on the account with that clearance." The full weight of the situation crashed down on her. She was supposed to be on Flight 1882, landing in Seattle, with just enough time to get to the AeroVista data center and oversee the patch deployment before the morning board meeting. Her presence on that plane wasn't just for a victory lap. It was mission critical. She glanced through the glass wall down the long concourse towards gate T8. The final boarding call for her flight echoed faintly. "Ben, listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice a low, intense command. "Isolate the failing servers as best you can. Try to route traffic through the secondary nodes, even if it increases latency. Buy me time." "Buy you time, Nora? Where are you? You should be boarding." "I've been detained," she said, the words tasting like ash, "by AeroVista's own gate staff at Hartsfield-Jackson on suspicion of having a fraudulent ticket." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're kidding me," Ben breathed. You have got to be kidding me." "I wish I were, Ben," Nora said, her eyes fixed on the on-time status of her flight on a nearby monitor. "Now do what I said. I have to get on that plane." She hung up and turned to the two security officers, her entire demeanor transformed. The quiet anger was gone, replaced by a laser-focused intensity that was far more intimidating. "Officer Frank said that so," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "My name is Dr. Nora Reed. I am the CEO of Ethelred Innovations. My company built the entire mobile application and back-end system that AeroVista Airlines currently runs on. That system is, as we speak, experiencing a cascading failure that will ground their entire fleet within the next 2 hours." Frank stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. "The only person on this side of the country who can get to Seattle in time to prevent a multi-hundred-million-dollar catastrophe for your client's airline is me. The fix is on a drive in this briefcase, and I need to be on that flight. The one that is leaving right now." She looked past him, her gaze a physical force. "So you have 2 choices. You can continue to stand here and humor a belligerent gate agent while AeroVista Airlines financially implodes, or you can escort me onto that jet bridge right now." The ticking clock wasn't just for her flight anymore. It was for the entire airline, and Brenda, in her petty exercise of power, had just lit the fuse. While Nora fought her battle on the ground, Robert Thornton, the CEO of AeroVista Airlines, was blissfully unaware, cruising at 35,000 feet. He was on a private corporate jet, flying from New York to the company's Seattle headquarters for the same board meeting Nora was scheduled to attend. He was sipping a glass of Macallan 18, reviewing the projected Q3 profits. The numbers were beautiful. Since the soft launch of the Phoenix app 3 months ago, customer engagement was up 400%. Ancillary revenue from in-app purchases had exceeded all expectations. Their on-time performance, thanks to the new predictive maintenance modules, was the best in the industry. The stock price, which had been languishing for years, was finally showing robust growth. Thornton felt the familiar, heady thrill of a winning bet. The 8-figure investment in that small, fiercely competent firm, Ethelred Innovations, and its brilliant, if somewhat intense, CEO, Dr. Reed, was paying off spectacularly. His satellite phone buzzed on the polished mahogany table beside him. It was his COO, Mark Sanderson, calling from the Seattle Operations Center. Thornton answered with a grin. "Mark, don't tell me the good news. I want to be surprised tomorrow." "Robert, we have a situation." Mark's voice was tight with stress, completely devoid of the usual corporate banter. "A big one." Thornton's smile vanished. "What is it?" "The app, the whole Phoenix system. It's going down." "Down? What do you mean, down?" Thornton sat bolt upright, spilling a few drops of scotch on his tailored suit. "It's a little buggy system lag." "No, Robert. I mean down, as in crashing, hard. We're seeing exponential failure rates across the network. Check-in kiosks from Boston to LA are freezing. The baggage tracking system is a sea of red flags. People can't book, they can't check in. And worst of all, the digital boarding passes are getting corrupted. We've already had 3 flights delayed on the tarmac because the gate scanners can't read the passes. Thornton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. "What about Ethelred? Get Reed on the phone. Get her team. This is what we pay them for." "We're trying her lead architect. A guy named Ben Carter is on a conference call with our tech team right now. He's trying to mitigate, but he says it's a core authentication failure. He says the only fix is a kernel-level patch that needs to be deployed physically at the Seattle hub. He says Dr. Reed has it and was supposed to be on her way here." "Supposed to be? Where is she?" Thornton demanded, his voice rising. "That's the problem, Robert." Mark said, his voice dropping. "We don't know. We've been trying to reach her for the last 20 minutes. Her assistant says she was checked in for flight 1882 out of Atlanta, due to land here about an hour before the meeting. But she's not answering her phone." Thornton's mind, a finely tuned machine for calculating risk and profit, was now a whirlwind of disaster scenarios. A full system outage on a busy travel day was not just an inconvenience, it was financial Armageddon. Every grounded flight, every missed connection, every furious passenger would cost them millions. The hit to their reputation, just as they were rebuilding it, would be immeasurable. The stock would plummet. "Get me the Atlanta station manager on the line." "Now," Thornton barked at his assistant. "Find out what happened to Dr. Reed on flight 1882. As his assistant scrambled, Thornton stared out the window at the serene blanket of clouds below, a stark contrast to the storm erupting in his company. The Phoenix Project. He'd named it that because it was supposed to represent Aerovista rising from the ashes. Now it seemed poised to be the very thing that burned them to the ground. On the ground in Atlanta, the chaos was escalating. At the Aerovista customer service counters, lines snaked back into the main terminal. Frustrated agents typed furiously into frozen computer screens. "The system is a bit slow this morning, sir. We appreciate your patience," became a desperate, repeated mantra. At Gate T8, the flight crew for Flight 1882 was getting agitated. The flight was now officially delayed. Several passengers whose digital passes had failed to scan were clustered around the podium, arguing with a new gate agent who had been called in to assist a visibly overwhelmed Brenda. Rebecca Lawson, the woman in the designer athleisure suit, was complaining loudly about the delay, completely oblivious to the fact that she was a co-author of the crisis. And in the glass-walled alcove, Nora's ultimatum hung in the air. Officer Frank, a man who had spent 2 decades dealing with lost luggage and drunk tourists, was now faced with a decision that could potentially affect the entire aviation industry. He looked at Nora's face, at the unyielding fire in her eyes, and then at his younger partner, who still looked confused. Frank made his choice. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Frank at Concourse T. The situation at gate T8 is resolved. It was a ticketing error on the airline's part. We are escorting the passenger to her flight." He turned to Nora. "Let's go, Doctor. I believe you have a plane to catch." He didn't wait for a response. He, his partner, and Nora began walking, almost jogging back towards gate T8, pushing through the currents of confused travelers. The younger officer, catching on to the urgency, if not the specifics, ran ahead to hold the jet bridge door. As they arrived, Brenda saw them coming. Her face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, contorted in disbelief and anger. "What is the meaning of this? She can't board. I haven't verified her." Frank didn't break stride. "Your airline's entire system is about to crash." "Brenda," he said, pushing past her, "verifying this passenger is the least of your problems, and also, funnily enough, the solution. Now get out of the way." He personally escorted Nora onto the jet bridge. As she stepped through the door, leaving the chaos of the gate behind, Nora paused and looked back. Her eyes met Brenda's for a fleeting second. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The look on her face was a promise of a reckoning to come. As she hurried down the ramp, her phone buzzed again. It was Ben. "Nora, it's getting worse. The Dallas hub just went dark. The whole system is starting to hemorrhage data. I don't think we have 90 minutes anymore." "I'm on the plane," Nora said, breathless, as she stepped into the aircraft cabin. "Tell the flight crew to tell the captain to make up for lost time. Tell them Robert Thornton's career depends on it." The Seattle Operations Control Center, the gleaming nerve center of Aerovista Airlines, was descending into pandemonium. What had started as a trickle of error reports had become a raging flood. On the massive wall of screens that usually displayed a neat, orderly map of flights across North America, blinking red icons were multiplying like a virus. Mark Sanderson, the COO, paced behind a bank of computer terminals. His tie loosened his face, pale. His tech support, VP. A man named Greg was barking orders, trying to manually reroute data and reboot firewalls, but it was like trying to patch a bursting dam with chewing gum. "It's no good, Mark," Greg shouted over the din. "The authentication servers are in a fatal loop. Every time we try to reboot one, the data request from the active servers crashes it again. We're flying blind. We've lost the ability to update manifests for flights currently in the air. We're grounding everything on the East Coast, but the West Coast is waking up and the whole cycle is about to start again." Robert Thornton's voice, tinny and laced with panic, crackled over the speakerphone from his private jet. "Any word from Dr. Reed?" "Did we find her? We're still trying to confirm her status on 1882. Mark replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "Atlanta is a mess. The station manager said there was some kind of security incident at the gate, but he doesn't have details." "A security incident?" Thornton's voice was sharp with alarm. "What kind of security incident?" At that moment, a junior analyst, a young woman named Sarah, who had been frantically cross-referencing incident reports with passenger manifests, let out a small gasp. "What is it, Sarah?" Mark snapped. "Sir, I think I found her," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned her monitor towards Mark and Greg. On the screen was a preliminary incident report filed by Hartsfield-Jackson Security. Incident type passenger disturbance. Refusal to comply. Location gate T8 flight. AV waiting 82. Seattle Airline staff involved. Brenda Kowalski. Gate agent passenger involved. Reed Nora. Dr. Details passenger attempted to board using first-class lane. Agent Kowalski suspected fraudulent ticket. Passenger became disruptive. Security called to de-escalate. Passenger removed from gate area for verification. Mark Sanderson read the summary, and the color drained completely from his face. He felt a wave of nausea. Greg leaned over his shoulder and read it too, his eyes widening in horror. "Oh no," Greg whispered. "Oh my God, no." On the speakerphone, Thornton was growing impatient. "Mark, what is it? Talk to me." Mark picked up the handset, his hand trembling slightly. "Robert, we found Dr. Reed. She was the security incident." Silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound from the speakerphone was the faint whistle of jet engines. Then Thornton's voice came through low and dangerous. "Explain." "According to the initial report," Mark said, choosing his words carefully, "our gate agent Brenda Kowalski detained Dr. Reed. She accused her of having a fraudulent first-class ticket and had her removed from the gate by airport security." The silence that followed was heavier, colder. The entire operations team could feel the temperature in the room drop. They could almost picture their CEO, 35,000 feet in the air, processing the information that his own employee had, in an act of breathtaking incompetence, potentially just torpedoed his entire company. When Thornton finally spoke, his voice was preternaturally calm, which was far more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "Mark," he said slowly, "are you telling me that the architect of our multi-hundred-million-dollar digital infrastructure, the one person who can stop this system from melting down completely, was publicly humiliated and detained by one of our own gate agents because she didn't believe a black woman could be flying first class?" The brutal, unvarnished truth of the statement hung in the air. Mark couldn't bring himself to answer. "Yes, sir." Sarah, the young analyst, answered for him, her voice quiet but clear. "That appears to be what happened." "And where is she now?" Thornton demanded. "The report was updated just a few minutes ago." Sarah continued, scrolling down. "It says airport security overrode the gate agent and escorted her onto the flight. So, she's on flight 1882, in the air, on her way here, but her phone is probably off." A collective sigh of relief went through the room. She was on her way. The crisis was still salvageable. But Thornton was not relieved. He was a strategist. He understood cause and effect, action and reaction. He knew this wasn't just about a technical glitch anymore. This was about a profound personal and professional insult delivered to the one person holding all the cards. "Get me the flight crew of 1882 on the sat phone," Thornton commanded. "I want them to find Dr. Reed, give her my direct, personal apologies, and offer her anything she wants. Champagne a meal from the pilot's lunchbox, I don't care. And tell the captain I am personally authorizing him to break every speed record to get that plane to Seattle." He paused, his mind already calculating the fallout. "And Mark," he said, his voice like ice, "get me everything you can on this Brenda Kowalski. I want her entire employee file. I want to know every commendation and every complaint, and find out who the passenger was who backed her up. There's always a passenger. Find them. When I land, I'm going to personally make sure Ms. Kowalski's career with Aero Vista is over. And then I'm going to have to figure out how to grovel to Dr. Reed for the survival of my company. The revelation had dawned. The crisis was not technical. It was human, and the solution would require more than a software patch. It would require an act of profound, desperate humility from a man who rarely practiced it. Flight 1882 sliced through the sky, a silver dart racing against time. Inside the first-class cabin, Nora Reed was a picture of controlled intensity. She had declined the flight attendant's fawning offers of champagne and hot towels dispatched with a panicked urgency after a call from the cockpit. Instead, she had her laptop open, connected to the plane's sluggish Wi-Fi. She wasn't fixing the problem that was impossible from here, but she was monitoring the cascade, documenting the failure points, and mapping the precise sequence of the system's self-destruction. This data would be invaluable later. It was also, in a way, her evidence. Her mind was a whirlwind. The raw humiliation from the gate was still a fresh wound, but it was now overlaid with the cold, clear logic of the engineer. The two emotions, fury and focus, merged into a formidable diamond-hard resolve. They had mistaken her for a nobody. They had treated her as less than. Now the fate of their entire enterprise rested in her hands, inside the briefcase at her feet. The irony was so potent, it was almost a physical taste. As the plane began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the lead flight attendant approached her again, this time with a satellite phone. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Thornton, is on the line for you. He insisted on speaking with you personally before we land." Nora looked at the phone. This was it. The first move in a new game. She took the phone. "This is Dr. Reed. Dr. Reed. Nora. This is Robert Thornton." The CEO's voice was strained, stripped of its usual booming confidence. "First, on behalf of the entire Aerovista family, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for what you experienced today in Atlanta. It was unacceptable. It was inexcusable. And I promise you it will be dealt with in the harshest possible terms." Nora was silent for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. An apology was the expected opening move. It was also insufficient. "Mr. Thornton," she replied, her voice cool and measured. "An apology is a start. But what happened today was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a systemic culture that you, as CEO, have allowed to fester. Your employee did not see a first-class passenger. She saw a black woman and decided she didn't belong. Your other premium passenger felt entitled to reinforce that prejudice. Your system, your culture enabled that." Thornton, likely taken aback by her directness, stammered for a second. You're right. Absolutely. And we will be taking immediate steps to address that. Comprehensive retraining, a full internal review. We can discuss your company's long overdue cultural education later." Nora cut him off. The plane's landing gear lowered with a heavy thud, underscoring her point. "Right now, your company is hemorrhaging money. By my calculations, this outage has so far cost you approximately $95 million in lost bookings, operational chaos, and immediate stock devaluation. It will likely cross the $150 million mark by the time I can get your system back online. Am I correct?" There was a choked sound from Thornton's end. "The figures are in that ballpark, yes." "Good," Nora said. "I'm glad we're clear on the stakes, because my willingness to fix the problem you paid me to prevent, and which your staff prevented me from preventing, is now subject to a new set of terms. The original contract is void." This was the power play. Not just to fix the problem, but to fundamentally restructure the relationship. On the other end of the phone, Thornton was likely reeling. His company was on a cliff edge, and the person who could pull it back had just cut the rope. "Void," he echoed, his voice faint. "Dr. Reed, we have a board meeting in the morning. We can discuss a bonus, a service credit, whatever you want. Just please help us." "This is not a negotiation about a bonus, Robert," Nora said, using his first name to deliberately strip away his armor of authority. "This is a restructuring. When I land, a car will take me directly to your data center. I will stabilize your system because I am a professional, and my name is on that code. However, I will not deploy the Phase 2 patch or sign any new long-term agreement until we have a new contract in place. A contract that will be negotiated by my lawyers with you personally tonight." The plane touched down on the runway with a squeal of tires. The race against time was over. Now the battle for power would begin. What are these new terms?" Thornton asked, his voice laced with dread. "You'll receive the term sheet from my legal team within the hour," Nora said, her voice like steel. "But I will give you the highlights now so you can prepare." She took a breath. "First, the value of the new contract will be double the original proposal, non-negotiable. Second, Ethelred Innovations will receive a 2% equity stake in Aerovista Airlines. You need my expertise not just as a contractor, but as a partner with skin in the game to ensure this never happens again." Thornton was audibly gasping for air. 2% equity, Nora, that's— "I'm not finished," she said calmly. "Third Aerovista will establish a $10 million charitable fund administered by a third party of my choosing. This fund will provide scholarships and grants for Black and minority women pursuing careers in technology and engineering. You will publicly announce this fund in a press conference with me by your side." She saved the most personal demand for last. "And finally, Robert, I want a public formal apology. Not just from the company, but from you. And I want it delivered to me in person at the start of that press conference. You will name me. You will name what happened. You will not hide behind corporate platitudes. And you will ensure I receive written confirmation that Brenda Kowalski and the passenger who verbally harassed me, Rebecca Lawson, are permanently banned from ever flying on Aerovista Airlines again, and that Brenda Kowalski is terminated effective immediately." The list was audacious, breathtaking in its scope. It was not the demand of a victim seeking restitution. It was the demand of a titan seizing power. Nora looked out the window as the plane taxied towards the gate. "Those are my terms. You will agree to them in principle before I enter your data center. My lawyers are standing by. Welcome to Seattle, Robert. I believe we have a long night ahead of us." She hung up the phone, the click echoing in the quiet cabin. She had turned their moment of prejudice into her moment of leverage. This was no longer just about fixing code. This was about rewriting the rules. The hours that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos. As Nora had predicted, a black car was waiting on the tarmac. It whisked her not to a hotel, but to the nondescript suburban building that housed the digital heart of Aerovista Airlines. Inside, she was met by a terrified-looking Greg and a team of engineers who looked upon her arrival as if she were a messiah. She said little, striding into the chilled server room with her briefcase. For the next 3 hours, she worked with a surgeon's precision. She diagnosed, isolated, and with the help of the patch on her drive, meticulously rebuilt the corrupted authentication protocols. The blinking red lights on the monitors in the control center began one by one to turn a steady, healthy green. A collective, audible sigh of relief went through the building as the first successful booking in hours was processed. Nora had single-handedly pulled the airline back from the abyss. While she worked, Robert Thornton was living through the most expensive and humbling night of his life. He had landed in Seattle and gone straight to his corporate office, where he was met with the term "sheet" from Nora's lawyers. It was exactly as she had outlined, audacious, punitive, and brilliant. His own legal team advised him he had no choice. The financial models of a continued outage versus Nora's demands were not even comparable. Agreeing was costly. Refusing was corporate suicide. By 4 a.m., as Nora was running the final diagnostics, Thornton signed the preliminary agreement, ceding to every single one of her demands. The next morning, the scheduled board meeting took on a vastly different tone. There was no victory lap. There was a somber accounting of the previous day's disaster and the new formidable partnership with Ethelred Innovations. Thornton, humbled and exhausted, explained the situation in stark terms. There were murmurs about the cost, the equity stake, but no one could argue with the bottom line. Dr. Nora Reed held all the power, and she had saved them. The karma, hard and swift, began to land. Brenda Kowalski was called into the Atlanta station manager's office that morning. Expecting perhaps a slap on the wrist for a customer service complaint, she was instead met by an HR representative from corporate and fired on the spot for gross misconduct and violation of company policies, her actions directly leading to catastrophic financial and reputational damage. Her access was revoked, her ID was confiscated, and she was escorted from the premises, her career in aviation over. Rebecca Lawson received an email later that day. It was a formal notice from Aerovista's corporate security division. Citing the passenger conduct clause in her ticket purchase agreement and her role in harassing another passenger, her diamond medallion status was revoked, and she was placed on the airline's permanent no-fly list. A subsequent leak of the story to a popular travel blog, complete with her name, led to a firestorm of public condemnation. Her social media was flooded with messages calling her out, turning her into a poster child for entitlement and prejudice. The centerpiece of the reckoning, however, was the press conference. It was held 2 days later in a packed hotel ballroom. Robert Thornton, looking ashen, walked to the podium. But he didn't begin with corporate speak. He looked directly at the cameras. "Good morning. Before we begin, I need to make a statement. 2 days ago, in an appalling failure of our company's values and basic human decency, one of our most valued partners, Dr. Nora Reed, was subjected to a humiliating and prejudiced experience at the hands of our staff. There is no excuse for what happened. As CEO, I take full responsibility. To you, Dr. Reed," he said, turning to Nora, who sat poised and dignified in the front row, "I am profoundly and personally sorry." He then went on to announce the full slate of Nora's terms, framing them not as demands he was forced to accept, but as a bold new path forward for the company. He announced the doubled contract with Ethelred Innovations, the new 2% equity partnership, and he spent the most time detailing the Dr. Nora Reed Future Leaders Fund, the $10 million initiative to support Black women in STEM. When Nora took the podium, she didn't speak of her humiliation. She spoke of opportunity. She spoke of how bias in a system can lead to catastrophic failure, whether it's in code or in corporate culture. She spoke of the importance of seeing and valuing people for their talent, not their appearance. She wasn't a victim. She was a visionary who had forced a giant corporation to evolve. The story became a legend in the tech and business worlds. Ethelred Innovations, already respected, became iconic. Companies clamored to work with them, not just for their technical prowess, but for the fierce integrity of their leader. The equity stake in Aerovista, which recovered and eventually thrived under the flawless performance of the Phoenix system, made Nora Reed one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. She never flew Aerovista first class, as just a passenger again. When she did fly with them, she did so as a part owner, a board advisor, and a living legend, the woman who was pulled from the line by people who didn't know she had built the wings. She had faced down ugly prejudice and hadn't just won an apology. She had won the whole damn airline. Nora Reid didn't just get an apology, she rewrote the rules. In a world that tried to put her in her place, she responded by taking over the building. The gate agent was fired, the entitled passenger was banned, and the CEO was forced to publicly atone. But the real victory wasn't just the personal karma. It was the systemic change she forced. The $10 million fund she created would go on to launch the careers of hundreds of young women who looked like her, ensuring the boardrooms and first-class cabins of the future would be far more inclusive. This is a story about what happens when prejudice collides with power, and how one woman's brilliance turned a moment of humiliation into a movement. If you were inspired by her strength and satisfied by the karma, hit that like button, share this video to spread the message, and subscribe for more stories where justice is served. What would you have done in her position? Let us know in the comments below.